So the Germans, without wanting to, restored our reputation. Moja Vojna HA4, the whole company was lined up. The former company commander commanded attention and announced that by order of the command he was dismissed from his post and was leaving for medical treatment. Then I commanded at ease, and not according to our conceived rules, asked the company if there were any complaints about the former commander. The company was silent. Then one of the soldiers took 2 steps out of the ranks and said, "Sad. So, Commander, we will not have such a thing anymore." I realized that in this company I will not be easy. While this ritual was going on, I noticed a few girls and my Moscow schoolmate, Mark Stepanov. I broke up the formation, exchanged a few words with Mark, and together with the platoon commanders went to the dugout. There we talked about the changes that should be made in the company. First of all, according to the platoon commanders, it was necessary to get rid of the girls. "It's hard to work with them," complained Petty Officer Manzelewski. "You send a guy on duty?" He goes, "You send a girl, I cannot. I'm sick today. Mashka Bolinina deceived 4 sentries. She crawled to her bow." We took her apart at the Komsomol meeting, but she didn't care about any of that. She'll bring it to us in a hem and answer to the company commander. "Why didn't you bring him up?" "You can't fool me," Lieutenant Perelemov boasted. "I have it all written down when I've..." Not so much this list as Perelomov's smug smirk made me angry. This is a very intimate matter, and he boasts of his list. I thought and said to Petty Officer Manzelewski, "Let's go to the girls." At the door to the girls' dugout I felt uncertainty. What will I tell them? How would they look at me? And the case is not simple, delicate. But it was too late to retreat. I resolutely opened the door to the dugout, and the first thing that struck me in the dugout was light. I had not expected that. However, I quickly realized the reason. The girls had covered the dugout with parachute silk. The girls themselves were without gymnastas, in brass. "How are you dressed? Why not in uniform?" "It's hot, Comrade Commander. You're on duty. This is an army, not a kindergarten. There's a lot of young men around and you're shaking your bodies. We'll be right out. Put on your uniforms and call us. I won't talk to you like this." We went out of the dugout. I was pleased that I had started the conversation that way. It established a normal distance between us. After all, I'm not a boy, but a commander. However, the girls were my age. Some were older than me. When one of them opened the door and called us in, I felt more confident. "Nay, sit down," I said seriously. "Let's talk." The girls looked at me with undisguised irony. But when I said that it is about their stay in the company and many advised me to get rid of them, faces immediately became serious. "I was told that you swear, smoke. Look at yourselves. What you look like. You're girls." They all started talking at once. They started complaining, making excuses. Stop talking. If you want me to understand anything, speak up one by one. We went to the army to fight, and they look at us here as if we were girls or young ladies. We're not girls. We all have a college degree or less. And they pester us with dubious offers. It's impossible to get away. Unless you send them away, they won't let go. Have you seen the chief of operations? He's got bandages all over his head. You think he got hurt in the battle? Dunya was on duty at the headquarters, and he started harassing her. Dunya grabbed a decanter and hit him on the head. The decanter shattered, and he came to his senses immediately. Do you think it's easy for us? The girls need absorbent cotton, but there's no absorbent cotton. We're pulling it out of mattresses, which is dangerous in terms of hygiene. And look at our boots. They're 3 or 4 numbers too big. What kind of look can we talk about here? I felt sorry for the girls, so I decided to leave them in the company. I'll try to solve your problems. I will not examine your behavior at Komsomol meetings, and not because I'm kind. Soon we'll all go behind enemy lines, and maybe not all of us will be alive. I don't want you to go through life without learning what you should know by nature. Go out with your boyfriends. But if there's any lewd behavior, I'll remove you from the company immediately. In the morning, I took the company to the firing range. I showed them what their weapons were like, and when they'd all fired, I said, "You think I'm picking on you? No. I want you to stay alive in battle. You're suicidal. You don't take care of your weapons, and you don't know how to shoot." Then I took my soldiers to the obstacle course. I was good at obstacle courses. I went through it and saw that I made a good impression, and when I showed the techniques of hand-to-hand combat, the company recognized me without reservations. Mark Stepanov said with delight. Well, now all the guys are yours. I myself, admittedly, did not think that you are so well prepared. And you're a real artist in military affairs. A replenishment came, and the first thing I did was to select a few soldiers who knew tailoring and shoemaking. I entrusted them with the task of dressing and shoeing the girls. After the mountains of corpses I had seen, and after the girls killed in the village of Savenskaya, some changes took place in me. I cannot formulate them, but I began to appreciate life and women more. Despite my youth, I had fatherly feelings for the girls from my company. I treated them without sentimentality, but in a kind way. Thinking about my soldiers, I always remembered that I was responsible for their lives to their mothers. Today, when talking about girls, the first thing that comes to mind is the fashionable word sex. It wasn't like that in our war. I had to see what happened to commanders who turned their subordinate girls into cohabitating partners. It always led to harsh and even tragic results. I couldn't afford it, and I can put my hand on my heart to say, without tinkering, that between me and the girls were different, pure relationship. I told them about Irina, showed them her picture, which I carried in the breast pocket of the breast jacket, and this saved me to some extent from temptation. Besides, I believed that the relationship between a commander and a subordinate is a dependent relationship. The commander is free to send a subordinate into battle, often to the death. With such dependence, I considered physical intimacy between a commander and a subordinate to be immoral. Then, when I became a movie director, I continued to consider such a relationship between director and actress abnormal. I shoot you, and you sleep with me is not love, but a production concern. Of course, there were exceptions. Grigory Vasilievich Alexandrov was youthfully in love with Lyubov Orlova, a woman and actress worthy of great love. I have seen the same relationship between Panfilov and Churikova. I myself am very glad that I did not marry an actress. I would not want to appear before the reader this purity, which does not care about women's beauty. That would be a lie. I, like all normal men, fell in love. I've known that happiness and that pain too. I have fallen in love, lost my head, and done stupid things, but I tried to avoid situations of professional dependence in my relationships with women, because I considered such relationships immoral. There were temptations, and a lot of them, but I managed to keep my family together and not betray my first love. When I studied at Vijik, the most boring discipline, Marxist, Leninist aesthetics, we read Professor Sarabianov. His lectures usually attracted the entire institute. He was a man of great interest, and often his lectures went beyond the formal framework. One day the talk was about love. When I was young, said Sarabianov, my friends came to me. They were such guys, so handsome, so smart, that if my wife did not fall in love with any of them, then she is a fool. A fool. But falling in love is one thing, betrayal is another. Betrayal is always disgusting. I thought and felt the same way. It was impossible for me to become a traitor. Falling in love is one thing, betrayal is another. The hardest, poorest years of our life, Irina was with me. She took on all the difficulties of life, freeing me as an artist from everything that could hinder me. We had no housing. We wandered in corners. We were chased by the police. In winter, with a small child, we slept at train stations. And there are no difficulties that she would not have survived. To be fair, I want to say, so sacrificially and selflessly behaved many wives of artists. Their sacrifices were not in vain. Many masterpieces that gave the world their egotistical husbands, created thanks to their wives, who tolerated their hobbies. But no matter how great those infatuations, no matter how great the temptations, love for their wives remained love, and this duality was agonizing not only for the wives, but also for their unfaithful husbands. Some time passed, and I received an order to report to the town of Nakabino near Moscow. On what occasion I did not know. In Nakabino there was a school preparing officers for our troops, and all mass events concerning the airborne troops took place there. Arriving in Nakabino, I found a strange situation. The summoned, like me, were in a state of excitement and humiliatingly ingratiated themselves with the petty officer, on whom, as I realized, much depended. I tried to find out what was going on. It turned out that the ensemble of Red Army song dance of airborne troops was being organized. I turned to the petty officer. I was called, obviously, by mistake. I do not wish to participate in this ensemble. I don't remember what he answered me, but I remember very well that his answer and, most importantly, The boorish tone of his answer angered me. How do you talk to an officer? Stand at attention. Learn to answer questions politely first. Colonel Munin, Deputy Commander of the Airborne Forces, came over. What are you doing here? I believe that I was called by mistake, and I asked to be crossed off the list. And the petty officer is being rude to me. What's your last name? I gave it. Munin looked at his list. We were going to appoint you to lead. It's an honorary position in the ensemble. I don't want to be in your ensemble. Why not? I'm not a musician. I'm a line commander. Soon my company will jump behind enemy lines. My comrades will be at war, and I will be here to do nonsense. I was indignant. The colonel gloomed. Do you think I'm engaged in nonsense? He raised his voice. You are a deputy commander. This is your direct duty, and if you talk nonsense, I'll put you in jail. He threatened. But I firmly decided that I would not stay here. It was disgusting to stay among cowards who hoped to avoid war at the price of humiliation. Waiting for darkness, I climbed out of the window onto the wall of the school. It was covered with a concrete pad, studded with a glass of broken bottles. I chose a suitable spot and, throwing my overcoat over the glass, jumped off the wall. When I arrived in Friarzino by train, the brigade was already loading into the cars. If you had not shown up, I would have considered you a deserter, said the brigade commander. I, too, would have considered myself a deserter. That's why I showed up, I answered. The echelon brought us to Ukraine, to Lebedynsky airfield. We were offered to take more ammunition, and, loaded to the limit, we lay under the planes, waiting for the command to land. Suddenly the air alert signal sounded. An enemy bomber appeared in the sky, but did not bomb, but dropped leaflets. The leaflets had a strange content. We are waiting for you. Come! We promise you a warm welcome. The Germans sometimes liked to play noble knights. We were not embarrassed by these flyers. If they really could give us a warm welcome, we reasoned, they would not have warned us. Evidently that was the way our generals reasoned too. As soon as it got dark, the command to the planes was heard. We entered the airplanes and everyone took their place on the benches. The command was distributed so that the commander jumped in the middle of the calculation. This was necessary to make it easier for the paratroopers to assemble. The airplane flies fast, and every second of delay increases the spread of parachutists. And in order to represent a force, it is necessary to gather as quickly as possible. We were to be thrown 40 kilometers from the Dnieper. We were to prevent the enemy's withdrawal to the west and block the approach of new forces to help the enemy group. We were ready for it, but everything turned out not as it was planned. When we were flying over the front line, we were under heavy fire from the enemy anti-aircraft artillery. Our airplane shuddered from the close bursts, and the fuselage drummed shrapnel. Fortunately, none of our crew was injured. There was a tense silence in the airplane. But then came the signal, get ready. Everyone gathered at the hatch in the order in which they were to jump. The command, go. And the soldiers began to leave the plane, trying to jump as many as possible. The soldier in front of me was Titov. He was wearing a heavy, powerful radio, and he was a powerful guy himself, an athlete in lifting weights. He looked down and put his hands on the edges of the hatch. I won't go. Dnieper. I couldn't wait any longer. I put my foot on Titov's back and pushed him out of the airplane, and I rushed after him. Once in the air, at first I did not understand anything. There was fire below. Peasant huts were burning. In the light of fires, white domes of parachutes were clearly visible against the dark sky. The Germans opened a monstrous fire on the paratroopers. Tracer bullets swarmed around each of us. Many of our comrades died before they reached the ground. I pulled the slings, the parachute dome skewed, and I flew to the ground. But I did not calculate. I released the slings too late. The parachute dome was filled with air again, but it could not cancel the speed. The impact on the ground was very strong. Losing consciousness, I rolled down the steep downward slope. When I woke up, I wanted to free myself from the parachute, but I couldn't. I was like in a cocoon, wrapped in the dome, saw nothing, and was completely helpless. I started to look for a finker, but the ammunition on me was twisted. My hands were tangled in the slings, and I could not get the finker. I heard dog barking and German shouts and imagined how the Germans would find me, helpless, tangled in the slings, and laugh, and I cried with resentment. I was ready to die, but I couldn't let the enemy laugh. Gathering all my strength, I made one more desperate effort, and scratching my hands bloody, In some strange way got to the finca. Having broken the cocoon, I jumped out and hid behind the nearest haystack. At that time, 2 Germans appeared on the steep hill. I saw them against the sky. One of them gave a long machine gun burst at my parachute. He obviously assumed that the parachutist was still there, and only then did both of them cautiously approach the pile of slings, canopy and duffel bag that I had left behind. As soon as they were sideways to me, I opened fire and took them both down. I ran for my life. Soon I was joined by Sergeant Aloksnov and Private Yakubov. Private Yakubov with an RB radio, and then Private Krasnov with a pack of power to the radio. I started calling our main station. She did not answer, but I still transmitted information about the situation. At this time in the sky appeared in the second wave of airplanes. From it, the paratroopers poured in. Unfortunately, they suffered the same fate as us. A group of 25-30 men from my company and from the 5th Brigade gathered around me. All together we went into the woods and took up a circular defence on a high ground with steep approaches. When dawn broke, the Germans made an attempt to capture us, but we fiercely resisted. They withdrew, but an hour and a half later, with forces much larger than before, made another attempt. The fight was hot. The Germans were coming through. A wide-muzzled F-frigate was climbing up the slope ahead of everyone. Akia Yakshimatov was sitting behind a tree, cross-legged. He had an anti-tank gun in his hands. When the F-frigate was close, Ahia shot, and the head of the F-frigate was gone. The Germans were taken aback and began to leave quickly. In this battle we lost 1 man killed and 1 wounded. The killed man was buried, and the wounded man was put in a hole and thrown with fallen leaves. "Wait, boy. We'll be back soon." It was dangerous to stay in the same place. It was decided to get to the assembly point indicated in the plan. A local woman who had been detained said it was 17 kilometers away. Maybe there we would meet the remnants of our brigade, we hoped. But when we got there, we found only a few disfigured corpses hung on telegraph poles, and an inscription in charcoal on a sheet of plywood attached to one of the executed. To Stalin's paratroopers, greetings from the Vlasovites. After the war, I read that the Vlasovites were not allowed to go to the front, that they performed only security functions. Perhaps we witnessed an exception, but I cannot disbelieve the terrible picture I saw. After looking all that was possible around and not finding a single living soul, we decided to return to the old high-rise. Our wounded man was staying there. On the way we apprehended a man in a policeman's uniform. He called himself a partisan from Ilya Morozenko's unit. A meeting with a stranger on enemy territory is an event that requires extreme caution from the commander. It is not known who this man is and what such a meeting will lead to. Some meetings you believe, others you do not. This requires intense attention, caution, and intuition. A mistake can turn into a tragedy. I was lucky. If I had made a mistake once, I wouldn't be writing these lines today. I believe Vasil. He told us that the villages nearest to us were Glincha, Pishanikniki, and Bushark. He also told us that Lieutenant Zelik's group was not far from us in the forest. We united with this group and began to act together. A few days later, Major Lev came to us. He told us that in the area of Kanev in the forest, there was a large detachment. With his arrival, the actions of our detachment were even more revitalized. We did not need food. The local population fed us, but ammunition was running low. Major Lev instructed me to cross the front line and, having contacted the regular army, to get specific tasks. Crossing the front line is not an easy thing, but I knew how to do it. Pavel Kermas taught me how to do it. True, in the 33rd Division we were not thrown so far and in such numbers. But still, crossing the front line didn't get any easier. We usually crossed the front line in threes. We would lie down close to the German trenches in some place with a good view and watch the Germans for a couple of days, noting the firing points, the time of changing guards, eating, etc., and only then we started to watch the Germans, etc., and only then would we move in. Crossing the German lines was dangerous and required great endurance. Usually, having chosen the place and time of transition, the 3 of us headed through the enemy lines. We had to walk calmly, without a shadow of nervousness, without looking back and without... The Germans were to take us for their own reconnaissance, going in search of a tongue. When we found ourselves on neutral territory, we could let ourselves rest and our nerves calm down. But the most important and dangerous thing was approaching our own. We approached from the side from which our sentries were expecting the enemy, and from them we could expect an aimed shot every second. Usually we, hiding from the shots, shout, "Don't shoot. We are Soviet paratroopers. We are our own." Unfortunately, few people believed it. Therefore, it was best to come out to our own in the place where the sentries had been warned and were waiting for us. But it was not always possible. One of us distracted the sentry with a suspicious noise, and at that time the other two paratroopers crawled to the sentry and, getting close to him, knocked him down and disarmed him. And only then we explained who we were and why we did it. There were all sorts of unpleasant surprises and even casualties, but there was... After the war, I accidentally met my friend and twin Pavel Kermers at the Kirovskaya metro station. It was a happy meeting. We came to our basement room, drank on joy, and began to remember the most memorable moments of our lives. And the first thing we remembered was our crossings over the front line. In that place which was agreed upon, the crossing was impossible. We found another place. We were to be met there too. We waited for darkness. Not without adventures we crossed the German orders, passed through the neutral territory. In the darkness we saw our sentry. We went to him. We went, and the sentry is standing there and does not move. Strange. We come closer and the sentry doesn't move. Isn't it a mannequin? When we got very close, we saw the sentry's face. His eyes were frightened and surprised at the same time. "Why are you scared, soldier?" "Comrade, you went through a minefield." It turned out that the Azerbaijani fighter was waiting for our appearance to show us where there was a passage through the minefield, but he dozed off, and when he opened his eyes, he saw that we were walking through the minefield. He was stunned and waited for the worst. "Comrade, don't tell the commander that I'm asleep." We promised and fulfilled his request. We were grateful that he kept silent. If he had warned us, we would certainly have blown up. There was another occasion when we went out on a fool. Fools exist in every country and under every social order. This one was ours, a classic fool. This untalented subject is sitting there, but he's useless. His other colleagues apprehend spies. But he doesn't. He's not smart enough. And suddenly he comes across two types who claim that they are paratroopers and performed a mission in enemy territory. "Well, no way. You can't fool me," thinks the fool, and, as is customary in such cases, offers us cigarettes first. "Now let's be honest," he says sternly. "If you confess, we'll keep you alive. If you don't confess, we'll shoot you." There are traitors in the division headquarters too. They must be exposed, he says. "And you will answer for insulting me?" He called his guards. We were beaten, thrown into some cellar. In the morning we hear the lock being unlocked and several people coming down the stairs. Well, we thought, this is the end. They'll shoot us, and then they'll sort out who's who. Fortunately, the fool did not go down into the cellar alone, but accompanied by Captain Ermilov, our identifier. Ermilov rushed to us to kiss. We dismissed him. Beaten, we had no time for kissing. When Yermilov learned what had happened to us, he began to teach the fool the only way he knew how. I had to help the fool out. But I digress. This time everything turned out safely. We got through the sentry, and he led us to Army headquarters. I reported on our situation behind the front line, and we received the order to leave the enemy rear. In the book Soviet Airborne, it is written that I still this time crossed the front line in the opposite direction. This is a mistake. The soldiers accompanying me did indeed return accompanied by a guide. But by this time it became known that the group of Major Lev defeated, and our soldiers one by one came out of the enemy rear. And I stayed at the communications center and had to receive messages from those who left with the radio station and identify the paratroopers coming out of the rear. Recognition takes seconds, and messages from the other side had to wait for hours. I had more than enough free time. I was wearing a hand grenade that we carried on our belt under our hearts. Nobody required us to do that. It was invented by the paratroopers themselves to blow themselves up in a critical moment and bring a few enemies with them. There was no need for this grenade now. But where to put it? To give it to some soldier, he would not take it, to throw it away. Someone might blow himself up. I went out of the communications center into the field, pulled the safety pin, and threw the grenade, and it didn't explode. I was terrified. I imagined what could have happened if the grenade had not exploded there in the enemy rear. My legs became cotton. I sat down on the ground and sat like that for half an hour, telling myself that nothing had happened. The grenade had failed me not there, but on my own territory, having returned to the communication center to calm my nerves. I took a brochure lying on the table and began to read. It was a story by the writer Wanda Vasilevskaya, Just Love. The story was about a young doctor, smart and beautiful, working in a certain hospital. She likes a young surgeon, also handsome and the hope of domestic surgery. He explains his love to her, but she rejects his proposal. But a new batch of wounded arrives at the hospital, and among the others the heroine sees her favourite guy. He is crippled, he is an amputee, but the heroine is happy. She walks around the hospital with a face glowing with joy, and when she is asked what is happening to her, she replies, "Just love." After reading this saintly story, I thought, what a heartless broad wrote this nonsense. She has no idea what a woman must feel when she sees her favourite guy crippled. This is not a work of fiction, but a crude, insensitive agitation. I have already written how much we hated the clickbaiters who decorate the blood and suffering of the people with fictitious curlicues. Only yesterday I saw torn, maimed, killed people. And today I'm reading this falsely optimistic semolina. Just Love angered me to the extreme. I hated Vasilevskaya, a woman I didn't know. I went out into the field, tore the brochure to shreds and blew the sheets to the wind. Not everyone came out of the enemy rear. Many smart, brave, beautiful guys forever remained lying in the ground they defended. They were not only Ukrainians, but also Kazakhs and Turkmens and Armenians and Azerbaijanis, sons of many Soviet people. They died for Ukraine. Today it has forgotten them. Having reached Kursk, our small detachment of those who came out from across the Dnieper tried to board a train to the capital. We were not allowed in. We had no tickets, only a certificate that we were going to Moscow, but we still crammed into the vestibule of one car. The train started. Soon we realized that we would not be able to stand on our feet the whole way. We tried to open the door to the car, but it was firmly locked. We decided to wait for the nearest stop, and with the help of the military commandant to get us into the carriage. But suddenly the key in the door turned and an elderly conductor appeared in the door. "Why are you standing here?" He was surprised. We were not allowed into the carriage. We have no tickets, only a certificate. What certificate? I showed him our certificate. After reading it, the conductor became agitated. "They wouldn't let you in, you bastards. And there's all kinds of trash in the car. They should all pray for you. You saved the motherland. Thank you, sons. Get in the car. This is your right for centuries. For all centuries." The old man was worried, and we were glad to hear a kind word. We entered the carriage. The old man opened one door. The compartment was packed to capacity. The old man opened another, a third, and finally saw a compartment not very full of people. "Make room, citizens. Let the soldier sit down. Come in, boy." The speculators squeezed in. Ashta Husseinov winked at us and entered the compartment. Through the open door we watched how, having squeezed two men, Ashta sat like that for a few minutes, then unbuttoned the collar of his uniform and began to scratch himself. It was a simulation. This time we had no lice. We understood what Ashta was up to, and he was playing the louse very naturally. One by one the passengers began to leave the compartment. Soon the compartment was completely empty. "No, come on, guys, come in," said Ashta, smiling triumphantly. We went in, sat down on the empty benches, and so we reached Moscow. First we went to Red Square, and there we marched in a parade march past the mausoleum. The rare passers-by looked in amazement at the small column in shabby and tattered uniforms typing a parade step across the square in the early morning. Then we went to Kirovskaya, to the headquarters of the airborne troops. The time was early. There we were met by the duty officer. Disrupted an important operation and came to report on the work done. He said unfriendly. We realized that this was not his opinion. He was repeating the words of someone in charge. Someone should be responsible for the failure of the operation, and the responsibility was put on us. "You're wrong," I said. "We didn't come to justify ourselves. We came to report that we are still alive. Tell that to your superiors." Returning to Frazino, we went to the guilty for a couple of weeks. But then, quite unexpectedly, we were summoned to Moscow. They shook hands with us, clapped us on the shoulders in a friendly manner, and we understood nothing. Then we were summoned to the hall of the military council and were ordered. I received the Order of the Red Star, and my comrades received medals. It turned out that while we were walking in a black body, our infantry, forcing the Dnieper, captured the documents of the German headquarters, in which the Germans reported on how they fought us. It turned out that we caused the Germans a lot of trouble. We attacked their headquarters. We disrupted their communications, brought chaos to the management of troops. We destroyed the calculations of long-range guns firing across the river at our troops. Trying to fight us, the Germans suffered heavy losses in manpower and equipment. So the Germans, without wishing it themselves, restored our reputation. Leaving the meeting room of the military council, I ran into Colonel Monin at the door. He recognized me. You. I say. 20 days arrest. 20 days of arrest. I answered with joy. I didn't have to serve 20 days. Colonel Ivanenko found out about the arrest and reported to Gomov, a member of the military council. On the 5th day I was released. Then on business I visited Nakabino and met with members of the ensemble. They looked at me with superiority. They pitied and did not understand me. And I looked at them and also pitied and did not understand them. How they had limited their lives. How impoverished they were by choosing the ensemble. Yes, I could have died 1,000 times, but I fought. I risked. I did not hide behind other people's backs. My conscience is clear. And what about them? How sluggish and monotonous they lived all this time? I wanted to go to the front, but they wouldn't let me in. I knew it wasn't true. Those who really wanted to go to the front got to the front. I have no complaints about those who were not on the front. Many of them were really useful on the home front. I bow to those who, in the conditions of the war, reforged weapons for the front, who clothed and fed us. But why make excuses and lie? Our troops were driving the Germans out of the Soviet Union. The North Caucasus was liberated. All the time Irina was in the occupation, my thoughts were about her. I was afraid of losing her. Now that the Caucasus was liberated, I decided that I would find her and marry her. Lately I've been thinking only of that. I heard that for every jump behind enemy lines, Stalin ordered a 2-week vacation. But nobody used that order. It wasn't customary. I decided that this time I should get a vacation. The good thing was a business trip to Moscow. I came to Kirovskaya, to the headquarters of the airborne troops, and asked for a 2-week leave. What vacation? Where to? Surprised, bosses. I want to get married. Hey, it's too early for you to get married. Said Colonel Ivanenko. He has always patronized me, recommended me for membership in the party, and treated me like a father. And I think it's high time. I objected. How long have you known the girl? The general asked. No, since the winter of the 41st. Well, that's right. Why bother a girl's head, said the general. But I wouldn't advise him to get married. It's too early, Ivanenko insisted. And when you got married, how old were you? 22. Why don't you advise him? That's why I don't advise him, Ivanenko said and laughed himself. The general and I laughed too. And I got a vacation after all. In those days it was almost impossible to get to Esenchuki in a week. I showed miracles of equilibrium. I jumped from one echelon to another, rode on the platforms surrounding the boiler of the locomotive, and on open platforms, and in the locomotive tambour and in buffers. I might say that I flew on the wings of love to my beloved. But wings of love are slow transportation in a war-torn country. Only on the 5th day of the journey, at night I found myself in Esenchuki. I came to Lunacharsky Street and saw that on the door of the apartment where Irina lived hung a large barn lock. She's at her aunt's, I decided. We must find the aunt. There's not a minute to lose. Pyatigorskaya, 17. It's on the other side of town. I ran to Pyatigorskaya. The city was asleep, plunged into darkness. The numbers on the houses were not visible. To get to the room and see it, I tried to climb up the drainpipe to it. It could not bear the strain and broke off. But by the pipe of the next house I reached the room. It was impossible to see the room in the dark. I took out a lighter and lit it. Number 13. It was not difficult to figure out where number 17 was. I entered a small courtyard, small barn-like houses. Knocked on the first one. They woke up, got excited, opened a door. It was an Armenian family. When they found out that I was looking for Irina, they ran to the same shed at the very gate and started knocking on the door. Nadia Tikhonovna, someone from the front has come to see you? They were so happy to see me, as if I had come to them, to their daughter. Irina's aunt opened the door, saw me, and immediately called me Grisha, so she knows about me. I rejoiced, but Irina at the aunt was not. Where is she? Dina Tikhonovna told me that Irina was studying in Pyatigorsk at the Pedagogical Institute and rented a corner there with other students. Aunt Dinah wanted to make my bed for me, but I explained to her that I couldn't linger and, having received Irina's address, rushed to the station to catch the train. When I arrived in Pyatigorsk, it was already dawn. I found the yard where Irina lived, but I didn't wake her up so early. Let her sleep in plenty. I walked around the yard and only now felt hungry. I decided to go to the bazaar and eat there. The bazaar was deserted. Only the first traders appeared. I bought a warm corn tortilla from one of them and refreshed myself. Some woman brought a bucket of lilacs to the bazaar. I bought the whole bucket and with a huge bouquet in my hands went again to the cherished address. Now I didn't wait any longer, but banged on the door. Stop sleeping. The guest has arrived. Unmuffled voices and commotion were heard at the door. I was thrilled. Now I'll see her. I prepared the bouquet. The door opened. In the semi-darkness behind the huge bouquet, she appeared and for some reason immediately turned her back to me. Her coat was thrown over her shoulders, and I decided that she didn't want me to see her unclothed. I hugged her awkwardly from behind, holding my bouquet. It was only now that I realized it wasn't Irina, and Irina was lying in bed, covered with a blanket up to her eyes and laughing. I was embarrassed, and the girls were laughing at my mistake. That's how I met Irina. Then we went to Sentuki together. Irina's mom was sick and was in the hospital. It was a hungry time, and Irina had to feed her by selling her ration of bread at the market. This time we did without selling. I didn't go to the hospital. Irina did not want to. Apparently she needed to consult with her mother about my proposal. I think Elena Tikhonovna approved of us. Then we went to the registry office to formalize a legal marriage. The registry office was mopping the floor. We were advised to come back tomorrow. The next day, now at noon, we went to the registry office again. They were surprised. You again? We thought you'd changed your mind. No, we haven't changed our minds. Then you'll pay £3.50 to register. I paid the fee and handed in my soldier's book and Irina her passport. The woman wrote down our names in a school notebook. That's it. Now you are husband and wife. Give at least somewhere to sign. I asked. Unfortunately, we don't have a civil status book yet, the woman said and handed us a notebook. In it, under the words married, was the date, May 9, 1944. Victory Day was exactly 1 year away. We signed and headed for the... Be happy, the woman said after us. Despite the lack of any solemnity accepted in such circumstances, we were happy that we had become husband and wife. And it seemed to me that everyone around us was happy, and the sun was shining not as usual, and the warm summer breeze was especially tender to us on this important day for both of us. After leaving the registry office, we went down to a cellar where wine was sold, and I bought a bottle of Cahors for 120 rubles, the limit of my ability to pay. In the evening we had a wedding dinner with wine at Aunt Dina's. Auntie invited her friend. After dinner, Aunt Dina went to her friend and left us alone. I stayed with my young wife for 2 more days and had to return to the unit. Our 3rd Airborne Brigade was transferred from Fryazino, near Moscow, to Belarus, to the town of Slutsk. On the way in the car windows we saw the traces of a grandiose battle. From the swamps protruded the trunks of hit tanks, burned turrets and tracks, a lot of corpses. We passed the sites of the recent battles on the Kursk Bulge. It was the greatest tank battle of the 20th century. The Germans hoped to stop our victorious offensive, turn the tide of the war and restore the prestige of the German army. Already after the war, working on the movie Memory, I had the opportunity to see all the wind show of this time. Goebbels' propaganda promised the Germans an unconditional victory at Kursk. The screen showed thousands of tanks of the latest designs. The announcer choked with pride and hoped to conquer and severely punish the Russians. Everything was calculated, thought out, checked, and provided for with German punctuality. The fate of Germany depended on it, and even for me, knowing the outcome of this battle, all this caused an anxious feeling. The battle began July 6, 1943, and as early as April 8, Zhukov sent the Supreme Commander-in-Chief a report on possible enemy actions in the spring and summer of 1943. At the same time, the report made a forecast of enemy action. Life confirmed these assumptions with surprising accuracy. The report ended with the following conclusion. I consider it inexpedient for our troops to go on the offensive in the next few days in order to preempt the enemy and a plan of action was proposed. Life confirmed the correctness of this plan. Subsequently, Hitler's Field Marshal Manstein, who took part in the development of the plan of the Battle of Kursk, Rook. It was the last attempt to preserve our initiative in the East. With its failure, tantamount to failure, the initiative finally passed to the Soviet side. In this battle I did not participate, but what I knew about it, what I read in the memoirs and reviews of friends and enemies who called Zhukov brilliant commander of the XX century, fills my soul with pride. Today Bozapisitsi try with all their might to defame Zhukov. It is difficult to convey how wounded the hearts of veterans this democratic lies. Young people did not pay attention to these lines. They had other concerns, and we, after reading this, felt defamed and defenseless. We knew that it was a lie, vile and dirty. Yes, we had heavy losses, but we did not attribute them to Zhukov. We knew, where Zhukov is, there is victory. And we were ready to pay a dear price for the victory. Our democratic intelligentsia rejoiced at freedom of speech and considered it the main achievement of perestroika. But in our conditions, freedom of speech is not only the freedom to tell the truth, but also the freedom to lie brazenly and shamelessly. And in a country where everything is bought and sold, in a country where some people are swimming in dollars and others are digging in garbage, it costs nothing to buy a half-witted slanderer who is afraid of falling behind the progress. All freedom is useful only when it is limited. This is an axiom. Freedom without limits is freedom for bandits, for rapists, for killers, and for thieves who robbed us. They will say, by what right do you call them thieves? By simple human logic. I know that wealth is achieved with intelligence, labour, and time, and if a man became a billionaire in 3 months, he's a thief. Yes, evil tongues are scarier than a gun, and hired slanderers are even scarier. The measures proposed by the Democrats to fight them? Courts. Proved to be helpless. Whoever pays the most is right, people say, and this opinion is not far from the truth. All this is saddening in itself, and also because a nation that has lost its historical memory, lost the ability to be proud of its difficult, bloody, but great history, a nation that tramples on its heroic ancestors with masochistic pleasure, turns into a mob. Look around, and you will see a crowd instead of a recently strong, proud and great people. Stalin, like all Russian monarchs, was jealous of the glory of outstanding commanders. John the Terrible, in 4 months after the immortal feat of Prince Vorotinsky, who saved Moscow, accused him of treason and burned the hero on a slow fire. The victories and glory of Alexander Suvorov disturbed Emperor Paul. Suvorov was exiled. Stalin also tried to war with Zhukov's glory. He gathered prominent generals of the Great Patriotic War and began to accuse Zhukov of Bonapartism. You won victories, he said to the generals, and Zhukov appropriated them to himself. Found among the generals chimed in, wanting to please Stalin, but defame Zhukov failed. Zhukov was crystal clear. But even bloody Stalin, who hated Zhukov, jealous of his glory and tried to denigrate him, could not think of what came up with our ignorant truth-tellers. Zhukov the embezzler. What sacrilege! I firmly believe that the assessment of our past will still be given by honest historians, who will still give the past to honest historians who will be able to separate Stalinism and the Gulag from the idea of socialism. We were stationed in the city of Slutsk, in Belarus. Our company was located in a 3-story building on the 2nd floor. It was 1944. In the airborne troops there were innovations, light tanks, descending on parachutes, and here the tanker, with the star of the hero of the Soviet Union on his uniform. One evening in all his glory appeared in the room of the girls' communicators. The hero, who considered himself an irresistible suitor, culturally, as it seemed to him, introduced himself to the girls and began to dissolve the peacock's tail. The girls said that it was already bedtime, that after bedtime it was forbidden for men to be in their room, and asked him to leave. I can. He objected not without coquetry. We have the same order for everyone, E.T., said the girls. This is not a store here. Heroes are not given vodka without a turn. But the hero was not going to leave. Did you get the hero for the Dnieper? Asked one of the girls. Yes. For the Dnieper? No, he answered. I was one of the first to cross to the other side. And paratroopers a month and a half before you were over the Dnieper, and do not brag. The hero took offence. What do you think you're doing? What do you mean, paratroopers? Have you ever jumped? No, come on, pretend to be. Ejected the hero and roughly groped one of the girls. But the girls were trained. They immediately twisted the hero, took off his pants and spanked his bare ass with a belt. Then they brought him to the window and told him to jump. He chickened out. The girls were free to jump from that height. They threw his clothes out the window and put him out the door in his underpants. Thankfully, there was no one in the hallway after lights out. In the morning at the inspection appeared Deputy Commander of the Corps, Colonel Volkov. He came up to the line and strictly asked me, "What happened yesterday?" "I do not know." "Why do I know, and you, the company commander, do not know?" He raised his voice. This is how the bosses usually demonstrated their demanding nature. I turned to the formation. "No. Guys, what happened yesterday?" The formation was silent. "Sort it out and report," ordered Volkov, and gloomily retired to the headquarters. Then the most perky of the girls, Masha Bulinina, said, "Let the boys go. We'll tell you." I disbanded the formation, left only the girls. And then Masha Bulinina told everything in person, and with such humour that I could hardly contain laughter. And the girls themselves laughed. I left the line of girls in place, and I went to the headquarters to report. There I told everything I had learned. The colonel laughed heartily, but then he got serious. "Still, it's not right," he said. "A hero, an officer, and his bare ass. It's not right, and the hero's star is missing. Let's go to the girls." The girls stood waiting. The colonel began with emphasized severity. "The company commander told me everything. What you did was not in accordance with the regulations, but, in this case, the colonel did not know how to be in such a delicate case." The colonel was thinking. "By the way, where is the star of the hero?" "We kept it." "Bring it to headquarters." "Yes, deliver it to headquarters." Volkov was silent, thinking over the situation. The girls waited tensely. Finally, Volkov decisively put his hand to the cap and solemnly said, "On behalf of the service, I declare you a commendation. We serve the Soviet Union." The girls replied in unison. "But keep in mind," he warned, "would not talk about it." After all, an officer hero of the Soviet Union, the girls knew how to keep military secrets. But this military secret could not be kept secret. Soon the whole corps was laughing at what had happened. The hapless suitor was transferred to another unit. I did not take part in the storming of Berlin. The Third Ukrainian Front was sent to the south. We went through Romania and Hungary to Austria. I remember how, having landed near the Hungarian town of Szolnok, we received an order to capture this town silently. There were no troops in the city. The front was 250 kilometers away from the city. Each commander knew his capture area. I was instructed to capture and block the post office, telegraph, telephone. I knew where they were. We entered the city in our uniforms, only covered the orders with cloaks. It was Sunday. There were many passers-by in the street. Apparently, we were mistaken for some German satellites. The girls waved us hello. Our company approached the post office building. It was not guarded. We entered the building, and so that no one had time to report our appearance, we commanded all hands up, and then announced through an interpreter that all present were temporarily detained, but would soon be released to their homes. The servants were placed in a separate room and guarded. Having disconnected all lines of communication, I went outside and waited for the arrival of my superiors to report on the completion of the task. The post office was located on the central street of the city. The only reminders of the war here were a workshop destroyed by a fallen bomb or a funeral parlor across the street. Not far from the post office stood a poster board. Near it, leaning on a stick, an old Hungarian man was looking at a colourful poster. I was attracted by the stars on the poster. I also approached the bollard. The poster above showed silhouettes of flying airplanes with red stars on black wings. From them, black bombs were falling to the ground. In the centre of the poster was a black silhouette that resembled a nightmarish ghost, with a nagun in his hand and a red star on his chest. And at the bottom lay a murdered girl with a doll. The girl looked like a doll, and the doll looked like a girl. Along the left edge, from top to bottom, ran a wide strip of black and white photographs of Soviet prisoners whose faces, disfigured by beatings, were unlike human faces. These are the kind of people who will come to you in case of defeat. Goebbels' propaganda had indoctrinated the Germans and their allies that the Russians would rape, pillage, and kill. An old man looking at the poster said something sadly. I could tell from his tone that he didn't approve of the war. Yes, yes, I agreed. The old man looked at me, saw the star on my cap, and turned terribly pale. I was afraid the old man will die. I put my hands forward and backed away, showing with all my appearance that I would do him no harm. The old man also backed away, turned and limping ran away from me. Soon people were running restlessly down the street, and the street was empty. The city seemed to have died out. Only a young man and a girl were walking past the bomb-damaged workshop, holding each other's hands like children. They did not notice what was going on around them and easily jumped over the tombstones. I felt something symbolic in it. The superiors arrived in a jeep. I reported that the task was completed. The workers were isolated and there were no excesses. Release the detainees was the order. We obeyed it. The detainees were clearly surprised. They were expecting a terrible reprisal. Then in some small town, the inhabitants, led by the priest, locked themselves from the Soviets in the church and decided to die together. With great difficulty, they managed to convince them that they were in no danger. An inscription appeared on the church, on which it was written in large letters in Hungarian and Russian that the cathedral and the priests were under the protection of the Soviet army. The priest thanked us, and the division commander, in a flurry of friendly feelings, got the priest drunk, and he fell asleep on the asphalt before reaching home. For this, the division commander was reprimanded. In the battles for Budapest, our division was in the second echelon. The place with one-story houses was crowded with troops. It was evening. All the houses were occupied. Under the glass on the door of one house there was a note, occupied by General Ivanov. For some reason I thought it was a fake, and I was not mistaken. I entered the house with my resident Sasha Davidov. The owner and mistress were saying something, pointing at the note. We gestured that it meant nothing to us. There was nothing to do, so the owner had to give in. When the line was extended to the house and a telephone was installed, the owners respected us. They thought we were important bosses. We gestured that we wanted to wash up. The hostess put a basin and brought a jug of water. Sasha and I washed our faces, pouring water on each other. Then the hosts invited us to the table. I was hungry and immediately pounced on the food, and Sasha sat and looked disappointedly at the table. "Your soldier must be shy," said the host in Slovak. In the 44th 3 months, I was an instructor in the preparation of the Slovak national uprising. I prepared Slovaks of the 2nd Parachute Brigade for combat, and during that time I learned to understand Slovak and even to form simple phrases. I translated to Sasha what the host had said. "No," Sasha answered in Russian. "I am not embarrassed at all, but only surprised. Our hosts do not know how to treat Russian soldiers." While I was translating, Sasha got up and brought a flask of vodka. The hosts showed delight on their faces, and a bottle of Hungarian wine appeared on the table. Then it turned out that many Hungarians knew Slovak. Slovakia had been part of the Austrian Empire before the First World War. A ragged conversation ensued. The owners relaxed under the influence of Russian vodka and admitted that they were hiding their daughter in the attic. Sasha and I were indignant. "Who do you take us for? We are not fascists." The hosts were ashamed, and soon a gaunt girl named Marijka appeared at the table and greedily began to eat. Then, having mastered herself, she began to flirt and even asked us questions. The host translated them into Slovak, and I would translate our answers into German. Our officers had to know at least 3 languages, said Marijka, flirtatiously looking at me. "And you only know Slovak, and not very well." "There are 105 languages in our country, and we know many of them." I parried. "I mean European ones." Marijka did not concede. "But we fight better than your officers." The host laughed pretentiously and translated what he said into German. By the end of dinner, everyone was in a good mood and drank to Borotshag. Marijka understood this toast too straightforwardly. When we went to bed, she appeared in my room in one undershirt. As a Soviet officer, I immediately realized that a provocation was being prepared. They expect me to be seduced by Marijka's charms and make a fuss. But I will not fall for the provocation, I thought. And I was not tempted by Marijka's charms, so I pointed to the door. The next morning, the hostess, putting food on the table, rattled the dishes. Nervous. The provocation failed, I thought. This thought I shared with our Hungarian interpreter. He laughed. "It's not a provocation. You were given a friendly favor, and you ignored it. Now you are not considered a human being in this house. You should move to another apartment." Why did they hide their daughter in the attic? They were afraid of violence. It's customary for a girl to experience intimacy with many men before marriage with her parents' approval. We have a saying, you don't buy a cat in a tied bag. I didn't have to seek places with other masters. The war required us to fight new battles. Here I will have to interrupt my story and explain again why I avoid describing the battles. I love my army, I am proud of its glorious victories, but I hate war. It makes me sick to tell how men spend their best qualities, intelligence, will, skill, courage, to kill each other. And the battles are not much different from each other, except that the Battle of Lake Balaton was different from other battles in its intensity. The Germans scraped up their last reserves. They concentrated 11 panzer divisions here and hoped to repeat another attempt to turn the tide of the war. Hitler needed to buy time. In Austria, in the mountains, secret laboratories were working on the atomic bomb. It was Hitler's last hope. That's what he alluded to when he said, "I'll leave, but I'll slam the door so hard that the world will shudder." Fortunately, he failed to carry out this threat. In these battles, we lost many of our comrades, and I was lucky. I remained unharmed, although I got into difficult situations several times. But when the battle was over and we were heading towards the Austrian border, at night near the town of Papa, we were hit by a hail of mines and machine gun fire. I was wounded in my left leg, but I continued to shoot back, and only after being wounded in the chest with a bayonet-pierced right side, I handed over the command of the company to Lieutenant Perilamov and allowed myself to be carried out of the battle. Further, I remember everything as in an interrupted dark nightmare. I lie on the ground in a peasant's yard and hear Sasha's voice. Sasha swears he'll bring the horse back. The Hungarian is crying and begging to keep the horse. The horse? The horse sounds in my head. Then darkness and absence of pain. I woke up in some Hungarian village in a peasant's house. Next to me on the floor was a soldier named Krasnov. He was without memory, and only his right hand was twitching, as when working on a key. He continued to transmit the cipher. Then darkness again. How long I lay like that, I don't know. They said a long time. Someone sent a letter to my mother saying that I had died a heroic death. Sasha Davidov chased in a car to intercept the letter but didn't catch up with the mail. That's what I found out later when I came to my senses. Now I was lying on the bed, and the first thing I saw was a cheap chandelier with glass plafonds in the shape of a flower. Foreign, I thought. On one side of me lay Lieutenant Makovos, and on the other, Volodya Savchenko. Both of them are from our division. They were wounded in the same battle as me, and further away on the beds lay fighters I didn't know. Makovos is writhing in the heat. His wounded leg was swollen and lay on top of the blanket. It was beginning to have gas gangrene. Volodya and I began to call for a doctor. The nurse looked at Makovos's leg and said, "An urgent operation is necessary. I'll go tell the doctor. But she can hardly get up. She has a high fever. She, poor thing, is seriously ill." But in a few minutes Makovos was taken to the operating room. The nurse said that an elderly woman doctor got out of bed, struggled to get to the operating room and cleaned a wound. Soon Makovos began to recover. He turned out to be a cheerful guy with a good Koklatsky humor and all the time entertained us. Nevertheless, the wounded needed a surgeon and a normal operating room. We had to get us to the hospital, but there was no transportation. Then an enterprising sister mobilized the local village transport. Steep-horned Hungarian oxen drawn in long wagons used for transporting hay. We were loaded onto these wagons and driven to the town of Veszprém. On the way we stopped at some village. Hungarian women surrounded our wagons and gave us milk with fresh, fragrant bread. They looked at us sympathetically, shook their heads and laboured fie. They did not see us as enemies. I stayed in Veszprém for a short time and remember very little. I remember a difficult night. I'm coughing and spitting up blood, and a woman doctor gives me medicine. I want to sleep, and she tells me of her misfortune. Her husband, a captain, had been shot in the head. It was feared he would die, but he survived. She went to see him recently. A big, strong man was playing like a child, pouring sand from one jar to another. He didn't recognize his wife. And like a child, like a little child, she kept repeating and crying. I remember that Volodya Korin and Yasha Shevina died of wounds in Veszprém. I knew Volodya poorly, but Yasha was from Dnipropetrovsk and wrote good poetry. He will be a great poet, I thought of him. They died at night when everyone was asleep. In the morning we woke up and their beds were empty. From Vesprem, me and Volodya Savchenko were transferred to another hospital in the Hungarian town of Kecskemét. In this hospital I had to endure a lot of disappointments. They brought me to Kecskemét at night and put me on a cot covered with blood and pus. "Everyone is asleep now," said the young nurse. "In the morning we'll replace everything with clean ones." I agreed and began to familiarize myself with the situation. In the large ward, apart from the cots, there were 2-story bunks. Kazakhs were lying on them directly on the boards. There were also a few lightly wounded and apparently drunk people playing cards. The benches were shaking. The badly wounded were begging. "Brothers, be quiet. Don't shake the bunks. It hurts." On the floor, a young soldier was convulsing in an epileptic fit. To prevent him from collapsing, the nurse lay on him and put her hands under his head and held the legs of the sick man with her feet. From the bunk, some drunken scoundrel was commenting foully on this picture. Not far from my cot lay Gosha Kirillov. I recognized him. He was wounded at Balaton. "Gosha," I called out. He looked and recognized me. "What's wrong with you?" I asked him. "Not good," he moaned. "My arm was taken off at the elbow and now gangrene has started. I asked for a doctor, but he doesn't come. I've already gone to see her twice. She won't come. She says, 'Let him wait until morning, nothing will happen to him.' Go again. Tell her the officer wants her in the ward." The nurse went away and soon returned, wiping away her tears. "She'll be right back," she said. In about 10 minutes, an old woman with a sleep-dampened, discontented face entered the room. "What's wrong with you?" "The wounded man has gangrene. He needs help." "Hey, it's none of your business. At the front you're a commander, but here you're nothing. You're a wounded man." "I am a commander even on my deathbed." I raised my voice and objected. We went into battle together. "Why do you have wounded men lying on bare bunks?" "They didn't send us mattresses." "If you had told the Hungarians, they would have thrown feather beds at you." "No, feather beds aren't sterile." "Is the bed I'm lying in sterile?" "They'll change your bed in the morning." "What about Kirillov?" "He's got gangrene." "Nurse, give him a hypertonic dressing." I knew that hypertensive bandage was an excuse. It wasn't so much her words as the dismissive tone and sour expression with which it was said that angered me. I swore, and grabbing my field bag, wanted to throw it at the hated woman's head. But I had little strength, and the bag fell to the floor without reaching its target. I was offended and, to my shame, I cried. In the morning, Gosha Kirillov was taken to the operating room. I was transferred to the officer's ward, changed linen and put in a clean bed, and at noon the chief medical officer made a routine inspection. "I hope you are happy now," he asked me. "No. As long as the wounded are lying on bare bunks, I will not rest." "We are also concerned. But to insult an experienced doctor, especially a woman, is not nice. Do you advise to put up with the shortcomings?" "No. But this form of fighting doesn't do you any honor." I felt bad. The chief medical officer is right, I thought. But what was I supposed to do? Betray those I was fighting with? Look at the outrages calmly, put up with them for putting me in this ward? Don't believe him. My bunkmate said when the Nukshmaid left. They don't care about us now. The war is coming to an end. They're buying up everything they can from the Hungarians. All they talk about is where and what they can get. They don't care about us. I've been here 3 months. No books. There's only one radio station in the corridor. Nothing to do. The badly wounded, especially amputees, have bitter thoughts. No one works with them. And the convalescents feel a surge of energy. There's nowhere to use it. They go AWE in the city, buy wine and go wild. What can I say? It's bad. What my neighbour said excited me. What if we gather a group of the wounded themselves, say, teachers of history and literature, and organise conversations on historical and literary topics right in the wards? It can distract the wounded from heavy thoughts, and those who will conduct such conversations will not languish idle. In the evening, a convalescent came from Gosha Kirillov, from the general ward, and told me that mattresses had appeared on the bunks and that Kirillov was feeling better. They have moved. I thought and confirmed in the thought that we need to be more active ourselves. I asked the convalescents to find out if there were among us willing and, most importantly, able to conduct such conversations. Soon several voluntary lecturers appeared in our ward. We agreed to change topics immediately if the listeners were not interested, not to tire the listeners, to take into account the state of health and intelligence of the ward. We had several conversations, and it turned out that the wounded liked our idea. We found 2 historians. They talked about our national history. About John the Terrible, Peter the Great, Suvorov. Others read poems by Pushkin, Lermontov, Yesenin, Mayakovsky. They retold the content of stories and novels. They were listened to with pleasure. Among our activists was a graduate student of Kazan University, Dobrovechinsky. Before the war, he was preparing a dissertation on English foreign policy doctrine, but he failed to finish it. The topic was considered harmful and closed, but now the British were our allies and the topic became relevant. One of the conversations was attended by Kostin himself. After this high visit, the hospital authorities expressed gratitude to me and the lecturer. The postgraduate was in love with England and did not hide it. In our ward he was listened to with pleasure, and his talks made a great impression on me. The English in their foreign policy preferred not to get involved in wars with a strong enemy. He spoke passionately. They always had a strong diplomacy. They pitted their adversaries against each other and did everything to make the war between them last as long as possible. Let the adversaries destroy each other. Let them drive themselves to exhaustion. If one of the opponents was weak and there was a danger of victory for one of the parties, they would help the weak and the war would break out with renewed vigor. If the one they were helping began to win, they stopped helping. They knew how to keep the burning going, but every war ends in peace. When it did, England, having retained her forces, dictated the terms of peace, in her own interests, of course. In support of his words, he gave fascinating examples from the history of England. Unfortunately, his conversations did not last long. His arm healed, and he was sent to the unit. We remembered his talks with kind words. My condition was improving. I got on crutches and also came to other wards and read poetry. The war was coming to an end. 2 officers were discharged from our ward, one to his unit, the other, on disability, home to Armenia. Their beds were free only for 24 hours. Then 2 wounded men were put in there. Both of them had just graduated from officers' school. Both of them had blown up on a mine. Both of them had not regained consciousness. Looking at them, I thought, boys. They didn't even have time to fight properly and were wounded so badly. I had seen hundreds of wounded men in my life and could already determine whether they were alive or not. But it was too early for these men to die, and I chased away my heavy premonitions. I myself walked on crutches and had already resigned myself to the idea that my leg would not bend at the knee. I was worried about the splinters that had penetrated my chest. Coughing, I spit out clots of blood. There was a new doctor at the hospital, skinny, unattractive, but talented. I trusted her immediately. She took a long look at my x-rays and finally... The promise to save my leg possessed me completely, and I could not think of anything else. The nurse and the elderly surgeon discouraged me. The shrapnel shattered the tibia of the knee. It's just under the nerve. The nerve is partially damaged. Surgery could tear it and cause your heel to hang down. What's the difference? You're a cripple anyway. I objected. You don't realize what an inconvenience a prosthesis is. Neither does she. She has no experience. She just graduated from the institute, but I believed her and agreed. And in the hospital, the processes I didn't understand continued, and I reacted to them keenly. They said there was water up to my ankles in the toilet. I was indignant, and this is a hospital, I thought. Everyone is busy with junk, and there is no one to clean up the toilet. Thinking this way, I went down the stairs, and on the landing I saw a stretcher standing on the floor. Our wounded man was lying in it, and 2 captured Germans were standing over him and smoking. "Brother, give me a cigarette," May said the soldier when I came closer. "I want to smoke, but I'm ashamed to ask the Germans for one." I didn't smoke, but I had some tobacco. The wounded men asked me to roll them a bullock. I rolled him one too. "But why are you lying here?" I said. I was carried to 2 wards. There's no room everywhere, they brought me here, and there's no room here, and now they don't know where else to carry me. The Germans laughed. I trembled with indignation. The Germans were laughing at our orders. Wait, now I will settle everything. Furious, I flew into the doctor's office. At the desk sat Leah Semyonovna, the one in whom I threw the field bag. "Why is Rambelli lying on the landing?" I shouted. "There is no room in our ward." and to take care of the wounded did not occur to you. Mind your own business. I don't know what happened to me. I hit the table with my crutch. The table glass shattered, splinters flew. The inkwell toppled over and splashed the white coat and face of Leah Semyonovna, who hated me. She shrieked fearfully. If you scum in 5 minutes don't find a wounded man a place, I'll kill him, I said and left the office. And there was a place, and I gave the guy all the tobacco I had. And you, it turns out, are a bully. Kostin, the party leader, reprimanded me. I can't take it anymore. I demand a party meeting. Meanwhile, on the loudspeaker hanging in the corridor, announced that an important government message would be transmitted. At the specified time, everyone who could gathered at the loudspeaker. The loudspeaker was silent for a long time, only the crackle of atmospheric discharges was heard, and suddenly Leviton's voice. He solemnly announced the unconditional surrender of the Germans. We had all been waiting for this message for a long time, but then it sounded to us like a thunderclap, like a miracle, like something incredible. And, stunned, gasping with happiness, we were silent. We had tears in their eyes. Then there was a joyous shout. Victory. Someone, raising crutches to the sides, danced on one leg. Someone ran to the wards to tell the glad tidings. Someone, stunned, stayed at the loudspeaker. Hurrah! Came from the wards. There was both joy and bitterness in that cry. At last, we've won. We've suffered. I couldn't believe that the war was over and I was still alive. I remembered how after a heavy battle in the big bend of the Don we buried our comrades. When we returned to the trenches, someone dreamily said, "There will be people who will live to see the end of the war." It seemed incredible. There was a long pause. "And someone will live to be 40 years old." Came another voice in the darkness. And we all started laughing. It was so incredible. And now the war is over, and we are alive. And this is not a dream, not a fairy tale, but reality. In the wards, I don't know how, but wine appeared. We drank all night, cheered, rejoiced, made noisy toasts. 2 of our wounded men died without regaining consciousness. It coincided with my youth and was the most vivid phenomenon of my life. It taught me not to separate my fate from the fate of the motherland and the people, to know the value of every scrap of native land, paid for by the lives and blood of countless generations. In war, people's characters and their deeds are most vividly and contrastingly manifested. All my films, to varying degrees, are built on the experience of war. The pain of loss has always lived in me. We lost millions of people in this war. The memory of them is sacred to me. In order to understand what it means to lose 1 million people, you have to experience and understand what the loss of one good person means to the world. I told about it in my movie Ballad of a Soldier. This movie participated in many international festivals and won prizes at all of them, but that is not what makes me happy. It is known that movies do not live long. Some die a few days after birth, others live for weeks and months. There are long livers. They live for years. I am happy that a picture made half a century ago is still on the screens of the world and stirs people's hearts. My first movie, my debut in the movie, 41st, lives for more than half a century. The war is over, and I could not forget about it. Not only because the old wounds hurt, not only because of the pain of my dead comrades, of my brothers at the front. After the war, I continue to think about it because I wanted to understand what it was in my life and in the lives of the peoples of the world. How and why did it arise? What were our goals and the goals of our allies, such as Hitler and Stalin, Churchill and Roosevelt? And finally, what was the Cold War? I read the memoirs of our adversaries, talked to former German soldiers and officers. I had the good fortune to personally meet and talk with Marshals Zhukov and Rokossovsky, with Admirals Isakov and Sergeyev. I thought about all this in the post-war years, and I would like to share my thoughts with the reader. I remember the end of the war. Our army is storming Berlin. We finished the fascist beast in his lair. The city has been turned into an impregnable fortress. Every house is a stronghold. We have heavy losses, but we are raring to fight. Not counting our loss, we're winning. A little more effort and the enemy will be defeated. That's what we dreamed of all the long years of war. Where are allies? Why aren't they on the battlefield? The allies are stuck in France. They weren't in any hurry to get to Berlin. Why should they? Let the Soviet soldiers die storming Berlin. The Allies had more important things to do and they were in a hurry to be known as victors, as an experienced politician. Churchill nurse. Human memory is not resistant, time will pass, people will forget many things, and then he will appropriate our victory. It's happened before. Napoleon's army found its end in the expanses of Russia, and read history. The winners of Napoleon were the British. The Allies are not friends. They're together, but they have different goals. And if this is not understood, then the meaning of the war will remain incomprehensible. World War II. I was only at first glance a war of the anti-Hitler coalition against German fascism. In fact, it was conceived and realized as a war of the capitalist West against the Soviet Union. I know many people will disagree with me. They will indignantly say, "Not true. When we had difficulties, they helped us." It's a fact. It's hard to argue with facts. I'm not arguing. Indeed, the Allies helped us with food and arms. We are grateful for their help, and I have not forgotten it. But now I am not talking about facts, but about goals. For facts in politics acquire true meaning only in the light of the goal, in the light of intentions, in the light of the doctrine by which the war is waged. I know that many people will not like my conclusions because these conclusions do not suit them. But I have never tried to please or instruct anyone. I spoke to my audience as if they were my friends, sincerely and honestly. Not everyone liked it. Not everyone was satisfied with it. I was put on trial, expelled from the party, which then meant a ban on the profession, but I remained myself and did not change my principles. Maybe that's why my movies live so long. My friend, the poet Naum Korshavin, once said, "I am not afraid of being at the tail end of the movement, especially since it is not known where the movement is going. I, too, am not afraid of falling behind progress, especially since I know where this progress has taken us." Several days passed. We were in a kind of nirvana. But in spite of the fact that peace had come, life continued with all its advantages and disadvantages. One evening, Staff Sergeant Bagorazd came to my room. "I have something to tell you. Let's go outside." It was half dark in the corridor. The Staff Sergeant suggested, "Let's go down to the landing." I shrugged. "All right, let's go down. But why such secrecy?" "I'm leaving for Moscow right now. I'm escorting 2 cars with looted goods. The Deputy Chief of Staff of the hospital is with me. He's faking insanity. But he's healthy." "Wait, who was robbed?" "Us, the wounded. They got expensive gifts to give to the wounded, cut-offs for suits, women's and men's shoes, watches and other junk. They sold some of it to the Hungarians and used the money to buy cheap mirrors, combs, anointings." "I know. I got a mirror and a comb." "That's right. And now I'm escorting all this loot. Be on the lookout, we'll bring 'em out in the open." Someone appeared at the top of the stairwell. The junior sergeant's in a hurry. "We got to go." "Be careful," he said in a whisper and disappeared. Just like in the movies, I thought. At night I couldn't sleep. In my head swarmed scraps of evil thoughts, and in the morning in our room appeared a major from the MEP. "Are you the senior here?" he asked me. "No one appointed me senior." "I don't care. I was told that you have authority." "What's this all about?" "We've been informed that your hospital is in disorder. I'm an inspector." "There were shortcomings." I answered evasively. "What kind of shortcomings? Don't be shy, tell me." He insisted. "After all, you are a The more he insisted, the more I became convinced that he wanted to know if I knew about the crime the senior sergeant had told me about. I told him about some of the shortcomings, but not a word about what I'd learned from Bogorazd. "You're not being honest with me. Who are you afraid of?" the major insisted. "I'm not afraid of anyone. Why? Tell me, don't be afraid." What? I was pretending to be angry. "Talk to the head of the hospital." "Well, all right," said the major, got up and left. In the room remained Kostin, a party leader. He hoped that I would say something when the major came out. But I was silent, turned on my side and closed my eyes. This unrevealed behaviour, not in the party way. Said Kostin and also left the room. One gang leaker, I thought, and decided that here I will not say anything. I must be discharged from the hospital. Meanwhile, I was being prepared for surgery and finally called into the operating room. The nurses piled on me from all sides, holding my arms and legs so that I would not jerk from the pain and would not tear a nerve. The nerve anesthesia was used for the same reason. The nerve could not be torn. I could feel the wound being treated as the doctor made cuts in the healthy tissue. It hurt, but I tolerated it. But when the doctor got to the periosteum, the pain became intolerable. The doctor used forceps. I could feel it, to see if the splinter was holding on tight. It was already overgrown with bone tissue and wouldn't budge, so she used a chisel and a hammer. The doctor chiseled the bone to free the splinter. She lifted the nerve and tried to remove the shard. It wouldn't budge. She repeated this several times. Finally, it could be moved, so the doctor used all her strength and pulled it out. I felt the blood rushing down my leg and it didn't hurt so much. The doctor said, "That's it. My leg will bend." And she put the splinter in my palm. On the other operating table was Volodya Savchenko, also a paratrooper. While I made a plaster bandage, I saw how in the cavity of his tibia introduced a metal probe. Blood was pouring profusely, and the stylus went further and further into the bone cavity. I felt sick. They put a cotton ball with ammonia to my nose. I woke up. Savchenko and I were carried to the ward. We were surprised that the room was half empty. It turned out that everyone who could went to the party meeting. "Those bastards," Savchenko swore. "They guessed when we will be at the operation, and, turning to the sisters, ordered a stretcher to the club." The meeting was held vigorously. When we were brought in, a wounded man, unfamiliar to us, spoke. He personally witnessed when a drunken doctor shot a wounded man for disobedience. Not only was the doctor not punished, but he was transferred to another hospital with a promotion. Another wounded man complains, "My leg was taken off. Well, they could have put it in the ground or something. They threw it in the basement. I keep walking by and seeing her lying there. I'll go crazy soon. And why do you bury the dead naked?" Someone shouted from the spot. "I'm Mansourmian shouty. Give the floor to Chukrai." He was supported by several voices. I was given the floor. I began to speak. Someone shouted, "That's right." Others shouted, "I can't hear you." But I couldn't go to the presidium table. I couldn't even stand on my feet. And the wounded demand, "Speak, Chukrai." Put the stretcher on the table. Someone suggested. The bosses objected. This is a party meeting, not a buffoonery. But there was such a ruckus, the wounded were shouting and banging crutches, that the bosses had to give in. The stretcher was placed on the presidium table. I was outraged by what I heard. I spoke about the lack of discipline in the hospital and in the city, which undermines the authority of our army and country. Said that during the war I saw many hospitals. They did not even remotely resemble this one. There, the entire staff considered helping the wounded a holy cause. Now I feel shame and indignation. I demanded a trial of the facts that came out at the meeting. The head of the hospital, Gurevich, we saw him for the first time, said in his closing remarks that a commission would be set up, and if the facts that the wounded spoke of here were confirmed, the guilty would be put on trial. But he personally does not believe in them, and considers them to be the result of a disturbed psyche. And if such nonsense continues, the guilty will have to be transferred to a psychiatric hospital. And as for discipline, I'll give you such discipline that you'll never ask for it. The meeting passed, but the promised measures were not followed. Everything remained the same. I was still walking on crutches, but my leg, I could feel it, was getting better every day. I decided to go out into the city. Being in the depressing environment of the hospital all the time was difficult. The atmosphere of an occupied city with no law and order was even more depressing. I did not see the outright looting I'd been told about, but I had no doubt that it was taking place. There was talk of outrages going on in the town's theatre. I went there. A small group of wounded men were gathered around the controllers. They were not given clothes. They wrapped themselves in sheets like ancient Romans in togas. In practice, it did not look as picturesque as in ancient Rome. The sheets were not enough to cover the whole body. The underpants could be seen from under the toga. Plaster bandages and bandages were sticking out ridiculously. They resembled not so much Romans as escaped patients from an asylum. When the control had enough of the wounded, there was a victorious shout of hurrah, and the wounded, breaking through the control, rushed inside the building. On the stage the action was going on. Almost all the seats were occupied by those who had broken through. They were chewing on seeds and spitting out the shells on the floor. Many, despite the fact that the action was going on, were shouting from the balconies. "Mishka, come here. Everyone is here," shouted from the parterre. "You can see better from here." Mishka answered and spat out a seed shell into the parter. When a man is in the uniform of his army, he behaves in such a way as not to drop the honor of his army. When he is dressed in something unimaginable, he behaves accordingly. Bear with me as I am. Suddenly the talking stopped. There was a suspicious silence. Behind the stage there was a woman's squeal, and a half-undressed girl appeared on the stage. She sat swaggeringly on the laps of the actors, who were portraying respectable gentlemen. The gentlemen opened their mouths in amazement, and cigars fell out of their mouths. The audience was delighted and applauded wildly. All this made me uncomfortable, and these are representatives of the great culture of Russia, I thought. What will the Hungarians think of us? Barbarians. But I consoled myself with the fact that they were representatives of another culture. Our society, I reasoned, is like an echelon stretching over centuries. Its head is in the XI century, and the tail in the XVY. Give us time, we'll pull up the tail. During the intermission, some bastard rode a bicycle through the foyer, spit up with seeds. I pulled him off and slapped him. He didn't quite understand why. After visiting the theatre, I tried to create a squad of lightly wounded people to restore order in the city, but nothing came of this idea. The doctor who saved my leg said, "It's going to be a long treatment." Spring passed, summer passed, fall came. I was still walking with a plaster cast on my leg, but I felt that my leg was getting stronger. Opposite the building of the women's school, which housed our hospital, was the city cemetery. There were a lot of jokes about this neighbourhood. However, our dead were buried not in this cemetery. Once in a while a bell would ring monotonously and beautiful hymns would be sung there. From the motifs, they were more in praise of life than mourning for the deceased. I loved to visit the cemetery. Some of its monuments were works of art. It was quiet and everything was thoughtful. I thought about the war, about my fate and the fate of my generation, which was almost completely lost on the battlefield. Today it is fashionable to remember that. Going into battle, we shouted. For the motherland, for Stalin. I went through the whole war, and I don't remember this cry. I remember the swearing. But the point is not that we shouted. Going into the attack, many of us were really Stalinists. The point was that we all cared about our multinational homeland, about honor and dignity, about our parents, our girls, our friends who did not want to be slaves of the Germans. We knew what efforts, what enthusiasm and sacrifices industrialization had cost our parents, and it hurt us when it was all destroyed. And I also thought that miraculously surviving, I should tell about my generation, a truly great generation. I also thought that as a survivor of this war, I have a duty to continue the cause for which my peers gave their lives. These are not empty words to me. Our life did not consist only of the Gulag, as modern truth-tellers imagine. It was full of high and honest aspirations, respect for women, for labour, the desire to do people good. It did not work out. It was not their fault. They died for their country to live, for the people to live, for the power in the country to be improved and made fairer. Tragic and glorious fate. I told about it many years later in the movie Ballad of a Soldier. For this movie I was expelled from the party. I will tell more about it in detail in my second book. Sometimes I lifted my crutches to the side and stepped gingerly on my leg. It held me. I took 1 or 2 steps, it hurt, but there was hope. One day, while checking my leg, I noticed that an elderly couple who had come to the cemetery was watching me, meeting their gaze. I saw participation and sympathy. People are people everywhere. I thought if politicians don't pit them against each other and make them exterminate each other, if they don't corrupt them with the desire for greed and domination over other people. After many years, this thought took shape in my script, people, and not realized. I will tell you more about it. My leg was getting stronger every day, and finally the long-awaited day came. The cast was removed from my leg. My leg was bending, but not to the end, and nevertheless it was good luck. With a little effort I could not limp. I was not ashamed of my limp. It was the result of being wounded in a fair fight. But it was not aesthetic, and I was glad and eternally grateful to my saviour. I began to ask my superiors for a discharge. My superiors thought that the war was over and I had nowhere to hurry. It is necessary to recover to the end. It is necessary to put nerves in order to heal still festering side, pierced by a bayonet. What worried me was that I was still spitting blood. But I knew it could go on for years, maybe a lifetime. I demanded to be discharged. The brass had to give in. When they wrote me a certificate of wounding, I noticed that it listed only a leg wound. What about the other wounds? I asked. In the last battle, I got 8 holes. That's your main wound. You said it was a lung wound. Yes, but you didn't pay much attention to it. I demand that the certificate be drawn up properly. There was nothing to do. The certificate was corrected, but they made me extremely annoyed. I went to the warehouse to get my uniform. Comrade Senior Lieutenant, you've just been cheated. You signed for a cloth uniform, and you were given a simple and used one. Said the storekeeper. The storekeeper apologized, and the mistake was corrected. I started to receive boots. And again the storekeeper shouted, You've been cheated again. You signed for leather, and you were given kurzavai. Why would the storekeeper, an outrageous swindler and thief, care about me so much? Much later I realized that it was an act to get me out of my calm state. They succeed. I came to the ward agitated and indignant. In the ward, against custom, was Pater Kostin. The wounded were finishing lunch. Why are you so gloomy? Kostin asked. Now your communist has robbed me twice. Don't you dare dishonor the party, shouted Kostin. It's not me who dishonors the party. It's the thieves. You're lying. You're a provocateur. No. Choose your words. Gnunus. You're a provocateur. You're a self-shooter. Self-shooters were cowards who self-mutilated to avoid the front. They were very few, but they were there. The front-line soldiers despised them. A greater insult could hardly be imagined. Moron, I shouted. I have shrapnel and bayonet wounds. You're a self-shooter. You're a self-shooter. Kostin repeated, provoking me. I turned around and hit him in the jaw. The blow was strong. It was not without reason that I taught hand-to-hand combat. He staggered and couldn't stay on his feet. As he fell, he scratched the skin on his head on the corner of the bed. Blood appeared. Kostin assumed the pose of the innocently injured. Comrades, he addressed the room. You are all witnesses. Get out, you lousy bastard, shouted someone. Empty plates flew at Kostin's head. He ran out of the room. Half an hour later, a sentry came to arrest the bully. My sweet doctor stood in the doorway. Hey, I won't let you into the room with a gun. Don't, doctor, I said. I want to be arrested myself. Now I'll get them out in the open, I thought. That's how I got to the brig. Detainees for minor offences were sitting there. They began to question me. Why was I imprisoned? I beat up the secretary of the hospital's party organisation. What a guy. You're crazy. It's a political case. I was the heaviest offender in the brig. They put me in the most honourable place by the window and gave me all kinds of attention. And I kept waiting for the investigator to call me in, but no one called me, and I began to fear that I had been forgotten. These fears were in vain. A few days later I was summoned for a conversation. The investigator turned out to be a paratrooper. I was acquainted with him. From him I learned that a garrison had appeared in Keck's scheme since yesterday, that he, the investigator, was an accidental person here, and the only thing he could do for me was to transfer me from the brig to the ward. I know the rumours about you at the hospital. If you are arrested, people out of fear may believe that you really were a hidden enemy and say anything about you. But if you're in a ward, that's a different story. What you've told me is serious. But you had no right to get violent. They'll defend themselves with every means possible. They could take you out. So the only thing you have to prove now is that you have a bad nerve. By the way, have you seen a doctor about this? I have. Well, that's what you need to argue. And after you've proved it, you can take up the main case. I'm leaving for another garrison today. If it's hard, write me, I'll help you. He left me his address and left. My appearance at the hospital caused a sensation. The investigator I knew was right. Before that, they'd been saying all sorts of things about me, all sorts of rumours. Now it's all blown over. We went to the interrogation of the new appeared prosecutor in one carriage pulled by a foot horse. The head of the hospital, the chief nurse and me. The prosecutor received us with exaggerated seriousness. No. So, young man, are we hooligans? I said I was nervous. I'm nervous too, but I don't bang my head against the wall. Why didn't you see a doctor? I did. The prosecutor was flipping through the neurologist appointment book. There's no such record here. There should be. Let me see. See if you can find it. I've looked through all the records. The one I was looking for wasn't there. What's up? Did you find it? No, comrade prosecutor. It turns out that you are also a liar. There was a tape, I said, confused. There was a record. There was a record, the prosecutor repeated, flipping through the book. And for some reason 2 pages were torn out. He looked attentively at the hospital authorities. He tore it out himself. He did it himself, you don't know. He's capable of anything. I'll send him to my garrison doctor. We'll see what he says. But he's not a specialist. He'd be better at our hospital. I trust my own doctor. The prosecutor had already issued a request to the garrison doctor. I waited for the garrison doctor for a long time, and naturally I was worried. The chief medical officer stayed with me. This worried me. There was no telling what he might say, but the garrison doctor wouldn't let the chief medical officer in. Excuse me, colleague. I didn't get a request for a consultation. But I could help. No. Thank you. I'll take care of it myself. The garrison doctor turned out to be a paratrooper from our division. He quickly wrote a response to the prosecutor. The reactive state of the patient is explained by severe wounds and experiences at the front. But the hospital authorities did not rest on this. They sent me to the city of Bayeux to the commission of the MIP. In the back of a semi-truck rode, except for me, Costin, a pater Costin, and a sister close to me. She would be a witness in case I dissolved again. I understood this and decided not to answer the remarks. In Bayeux, first of all, I was sent for a medical examination. I went into a small room and was surprised that there was not a commission but one doctor. So what did you do there? She asked me right off the bat. Where? I didn't understand at first. In the hospital. Yes, in the hospital, she repeated in an official tone. I realized that I had to have a detailed conversation with her, and I wanted to move a stool to the table, but the stool wouldn't budge. It was screwed to the floor. I also realized that here I had to be, if not in everything, then as frank as possible. I spoke honestly about my incidents and what they were caused by. And what? You didn't realize what was happening to you? I did, but for some reason I couldn't do otherwise. You're perfectly normal. Just a little nervous. This is a note from your hospital director. You might find it useful. I mechanically took the note and said, Can I go now? Yes, go ahead. When I left the office, Costin pestered me with questions. What did she tell you? That I'm a perfectly normal person. I shouldn't have told him that, because then I was sent to the party committee, and there they especially insisted that I was perfectly normal and was faking a nervous breakdown. There, in the party committee, there were many champions of discipline, especially the skinny doctor, a great connoisseur of Lenin's sayings, was harpooning. Comrade Lenin, see? Whoever does not maintain order and discipline in the workers, and peasants' Red Army is a traitor and a traitor. And, pointing his finger at me, he rhetorically questioned, Did he maintain discipline and order in the army? No. Then he is a traitor and a traitor. He has no place in our party. And all the members of the commission shook their heads in agreement. I tried to tell them why I resorted to such measures, but they wouldn't listen to me. Only the chairman of the party committee. Why don't we let him speak? Let him speak. Then give him permission to beat up the hospital staff at once. The chairman's proposal was drowned in shouts. I was asked to go out into the corridor and wait for the decision. I went out. I was tormented by resentment. They didn't even listen to me. There is no truth in the party. I thought, sitting on a bench in the corridor. It's nowhere to be found. Then the committee called me in and announced the decision. Expel me. The one who quoted Lenin jumped up. Put your party card on the table. I'll hit you so hard for your party card that you'll forget all the quotations at once. Here's an example for you. He's a hooligan. We drove back in the same car. There wasn't enough gasoline or oil, so Costin and the nurse walked to the village. I stayed in the car alone. I felt sick at heart. I didn't want to live. Put a bullet in my forehead now, and the score with this rotten world will be numbered, I thought, holding the handle of the gun in my pocket. But as I thought this, I pictured the faces of my opponents. They were smiling. They were pleased. No. I decided. I won't give them that pleasure. I'll suffer, I'll be humiliated, but I won't give in to them. I returned to the hospital, not myself. I didn't want to talk to anyone. They betrayed me, left me alone in front of someone who is also their enemy. I lay in semi-darkness and did not answer questions. A few days passed. I was raised and told to go to Constanta, to the central group of troops, to the party committee, which would approve the exclusion. The documents were prepared in advance. I got to Constanta. I remember badly and in fragments. At first, from Kekskemet, I rode in an ordinary carriage. In that carriage there was a group of operetta artists. A young actress was laughing all the time. Opposite her sat a gloomy woman in a military doctor's uniform. "Why are you so serious?" asked the giggly woman. The translator translated. The woman smiled unhappily. If you had my grief," she said, "you wouldn't be asking me these questions." Then there was some station. I went out for a drink. And I woke up in an ambulance car. An elderly sister fed me kizil and said something about her son, who also fought in the war. Then there was a transfer, I think, in Timosheri. From there I got to Constanta. The party commission was held in a room, the door of which was covered with oilcloth. And in a small room in front of this door sat and talked in a low voice people who had arrived, like me, at the party committee. Here I met my enemy, who was quoting Lenin. "I advise you to admit your guilt. The party committee treats such people leniently." He was deeply disgusted with me, and I sent him to a known address. They were called alphabetically. My surname, as you know, with an H, and I prepared to wait for a long time. Maybe I even fell asleep. I didn't sleep all night. It was not so much the impending expulsion that tormented me, but the injustice. Finally, I heard my last name. I got up quickly and almost flew into the committee room. "And where is your representative of MEEP?" "I don't know. He was around here somewhere." "We'll take the next case and you look for your representative." I left the party committee room. I looked in every corner. He was nowhere to be found. I decided to go to the train station. Why this thought came into my head, I still don't understand. I hopped on crutches to the station and immediately saw a representative of the MEP walking by the distant cars. A station patrol passed me by. "Mother, the general ordered to find this comrade and bring him to the party committee." "I can do that," said the patrol chief cheerfully. I saw how the MEPA representative was detained and brought to the party committee. The patrol chief reported to the general. "By your order, the comrade has been brought in." "Good. Thank you. You're free to go." The representative was given the floor. He repeated all the claims against me. He didn't forget the Lenin quote. The general chairman of the commission turned to me. "Now what do you say?" "I ask only one thing. Please do not interrupt me." I asked, worried. "All right. We won't. Just briefly." I'd already thought out my speech 100 times. I told about the outrages that were going on in the hospital and about my actions without hiding anything. "You made it all up," shouted the representative. "And we have authoritative evidence that all this is true." The spokesman immediately went quiet. I did not immediately realize what had happened. It turned out that my ward mates had written a letter to the party committee and not only signed it, but also put their party card numbers under each signature. Actually, in those days, collective letters were forbidden. But this letter was accepted. I don't want to describe how cowardly and pathetic the representative behaved, saying that he had been let down and that he didn't know any of this. "But you should have known. The fate of a man is being decided," said the general. Then I made up my mind and told everything I had kept silent about before. I showed both the conclusion of the garrison doctor and the note of the head of the hospital, and told about the combination with gifts to the wounded. The members of the commission were outraged. The commission decide I am to be reinstated in the party. The representative of the MEEP to announce a strict reprimand, to give me an accompanying sister for the return trip and send me to Kekskemet to recover. There was a trial. I was invited as a witness, but I flatly refused. I was discharged from the hospital only in October. Before going to the division headquarters, I decided to visit my unit. I couldn't wait to find out what had happened to my comrades. When, leaning on a stick, I was dragging myself to the forest in the vicinity of Budapest, where our unit was located, I saw a semi-truck coming towards me. When it came close to me, the truck braked sharply. The driver jumped out of it and rushed to embrace me. Then, having calmed down, he told me, "Comrade Senior Lieutenant, Katya has been killed." I knew that this guy and Katya were having an affair. How did it happen? And Misha, the driver, told Zubov, the new commander of your company, lined up the company in full view of the Germans. The war was already over, and the Germans launched some mines right into the line, and 7 men were killed at once. Among them were 3 girls. He gave the names of those killed. I felt incredibly sorry for the guys and girls who lived to the end of the war and died because of the commander's stupidity. Zubov was the son of a general and, fearing for his life, the cunning general had him enrolled in a military school. When the term of training was coming to an end, the general put him in a school of another profile, and then in a third. But at the end of the war, he decided to send his son to the front to earn orders. So Zubov Jr. became commander of our company. My indignation was so great that if I had found him, I would have beaten him up, but he was probably hiding from me. At the division headquarters, I was appointed commander of the division radio company, and together with Mark Stepanov was sent on a business trip to Czechoslovakia, to Prague, to the factory for spare parts. We arrived at the train station. We had to wait an hour and a half for the train to Czechoslovakia. Opposite the station there was a photo and movie supplies store, and I decided to run into it. I took a long look at the lighting devices and movie cameras. The shopkeeper was watching me carefully to see if I wanted to steal something. Finally, he asked me in joke, "Are you interested?" I answered in the affirmative. "And what is your specialty?" "I'm a film student." For some reason, the owner thought I was deceiving him. His face took on an expression as if to say, "Boy, and you decided to deceive an old man." He was partly right. I was not yet a student, but I had no doubt that I would be. I don't remember the road from Hungary to Czechoslovakia. It must have been at night. But the few days I spent in Prague were memorable for the rest of my life. People accepted us as friends. They stopped us on the street, dragged us into their houses to give us a treat, said nice words, thanked us for liberation. Our division really liberated Prague. When the Czechs announced on the radio, "Prague has risen, save Prague," Marshal Rybalko's tanks were sent to Prague from Poland, and our division was turned from Austria to Czechoslovakia. So Prague was saved. The authority of our army and country at that time was incredibly high. We were the darlings of Europe. We were the liberators. Then, when I watched newsreel footage of how we were greeted in the liberated countries, I remembered Prague and was just as excited. It seemed to me that I, too, was driving a tank into the liberated cities, and I was greeted with delight and gratitude by the local population, and that my comrades and friends who died for the freedom of these people were invisibly present along with everyone else. It is a great honor to be a liberator, a great honor and a great happiness. It is not granted to everyone by fate. We have been given a cup full of it. We know its sweet and bitter taste, happiness mixed with tears. The wind of history caressed our heads. It rumbled over the graves of the dead. Eternal memory to them. At the very end of the 45th year, the medical commission recognized me unfit for military service. I was returning to my homeland. I was not alone. Hundreds, thousands of soldiers were returning home, full of the brightest hopes. They travelled through Hungary, through Yugoslavia, through Romania. At one of the stations, an old man approached us. "Zdravia, Zovia," he said in Russian. "Congratulations on your brilliant victory." He tossed aside a grey strand of hair and exposed his skull with a trace of a sabre blow. "The Brusilov breakthrough," he explained, and asked for money. "I want to eat borscht." We gave the old man money for borscht without being stingy. Here is the last Romanian station before our border. There's a lot of demobilized people. We're making our way through the crowd to the station commandant. "When will there be a train?" Poor Commandant Horse, answering questions demobilized. "I don't know. I told you in Russian." He wheezes. "Comrades, I do not dispose of trains." Someone whispers in my ear. "Let's go out. An important message." Let's go out. Intelligence reports under great secrecy. There, behind the cars, is a platform with dismantled plant. We can get on and cross the border in 15 minutes, but we have to do it discreetly. Keeping secrecy. We crawl under the cars of the first train. The second, third, here at last, are the platforms. There are some machines on them, and between them, full of soldiers. There's nowhere to stand. We run along the train from the locomotive to the tail, looking for a place. We find a platform that's not so crowded and ask, Make way, brothers. The soldiers huddle closer together. Someone takes off his duffel bag. It becomes even freer. We climb onto the platform, and only one of us, Misha Garish, didn't have enough room. He stands confusedly on the ground, leaning on a stick. Others, whose suitcases, there's nowhere for a man to stand. Only now we notice 2 large suitcases. Everyone is silent. Whose stuff? Repeats a stocky sergeant with a purple scar on his cheek. The sergeant grabs the suitcases and throws them off the platform. What are you? Hooligan. Some captain shoves the men next to him and jumps down to get the suitcases. You've got trophies, hoarder, replies the stocky one. The locomotive backed up. The buffers clattered. We all helped Misha to climb onto the platform. The train stood still and moved off, gradually picking up speed. The December wind, which while we were on the ground seemed to spare us, now penetrated us through and through. The more the train picked up speed, the more intolerable the cold became. My comrades, knowing that I needed to take care of my lungs, stood so as to shield me from the wind. One of the unfamiliar soldiers said, "It's all right. We'll be patient. Soon the bridge, and beyond it is our land." We all looked ahead in silence, waiting for the bridge to appear. It appeared, but not in front, but somewhere to the left. The train, bent in an arc, was approaching it. We waited anxiously for this moment. Finally, the locomotive flew onto the bridge, and from there, from the head of the train to the tail, there was a powerful hurrah. And then the International. We took up this beautiful and dear to us hymn. We sang it with inspiration, with our souls, gasping with joy and tears, and our platform was already flying, rumbling over the iron bridge to a new, happy life. We believed the new year of 1946 was beginning,